Hello, everyone. This is our short screencast for week number 4, and probably many of you are checking this out way before then. And the purpose of this screencast is to get you, one, thinking about, are you going to do a systematic review or a scoping review? And two, to start having some conversations with your committee and thinking about what roles people will be playing and how are things going to look. And I'll describe more about that as we go on. So a Word document that presents much of this information has been uploaded into the week 4 module. And just kind of an overview here, by the end of this class, ARP II, you're going to submit a draft of your paper. And so don't feel like your dissertation needs to be done at this point, but you're going to be submitting a draft. And this is where I can give kind of feedback as a reviewer who is outside of the process, somebody who's not knowledgeable about your area. And so, one, taking a look at kind of how it's constructed and some things like grammar, punctuation, and are you getting all the major areas hit? And to kind of see, if there are things that aren't clear to me as the reader, those may be areas where you and the committee can address things to either increase content related to a particular topic or to clarify. Because ultimately, like I had mentioned previously, it would be awesome if you and your committee submitted your papers for journal consideration, submit them to a journal, because you're putting in a lot of hard work and you are collecting all of this information, you're synthesizing it, and then you're going to be basically creating these conclusions based upon the available evidence, and your hard work could help to inform and educate others. What we're going to be doing then in AR3P is finalizing your draft, and maybe you will submit it at some point during the term. And then, of course, we're going to be looking at what kind of product do you have to prepare for your symposium. If I remember correctly, you do a poster type presentation, but I have to clarify that. So we can kind of work on that during ARP3. So looking at some definitions here from Temple University Libraries, looking at a systematic review, and of course we've talked about these previously, but a systematic review is a summary of research results that uses explicit and reproducible methods to systematically search, critically appraise, and synthesize on a specific issue. It synthesizes the results of multiple primary studies related to each other by using strategies that reduce biases and errors. So how does that compare to a scoping review? Mack et al. Defines a scoping review as a type of knowledge synthesis that uses a systematic and iterative approach to identify and synthesize an existing or emerging body of literature on a given topic. The main reasons for conducting a scoping review are to map the extent, range, and nature of the literature, as well as to determine possible gaps in the literature on a topic. Those kind of sound the same, don't they? We saw the word systematic there. We saw synthesizing, concluding. So they can kind of feel the same. And maybe sometimes there's a little bit of overlap. But here's what I want you to do. Ultimately, the decision should come down to you and your committee, because you and your committee are going to know your literature the best and know where kind of the state of evidence is. But here are my recommendations. So if you have a topic that there are 8 to 10 randomized controlled trials, or the vast majority of papers, let's say, there's like 14 or 15 good papers on the topic and 10 of them are randomized controlled trials, then you should select the systematic review. You and your committee will have to decide if you include, if there's more than just randomized control trials, you all have to conclude whether or not you want to include those or not. Because again, sometimes systematic reviews are just specifically of randomized control trials, and sometimes people can take a little bit more of an expansive view and will include other lower forms of evidence. Ultimately, if you are able to focus on a lot of randomized control trials, then you can have some really good strength of evidence and publish a systematic review. We're talking level 1 evidence, taking a look at the big picture and reporting what's out there. However, if the evidence related to your topic lacks a large number of randomized controlled trials, let's say there's a variety of things across the board where there's been some small cohorts, maybe pre-test, post-test designs with only one group. Maybe there has been quasi-experimental and a few randomized controlled trials here or there. Then you should probably consider a scoping review. With a scoping review, you'd be able to, again, look at the current state of knowledge and provide some recommendations, but you're appreciating that it doesn't rise to the level where it should be at the top of that hierarchy pyramid. Now, I've put some additional examples of systematic reviews and scoping reviews in the week 4 module. And the purpose of those is not necessarily to read those and become experts in the topics, but to have examples. And I think one of the best ways of learning how to write a particular type of manuscript is to see how everybody else is doing it. And by that practice of reading things, you kind of get a flow, you kind of get a rhythm for how things work, and get an idea for what is needed to be included and what shouldn't be. And I'll talk more about some of that stuff as we get into some of the scientific writing topics later in the term. So what are the components of your manuscript? So whether you're writing a systematic review or a scoping review, you should include the following sections, and you'll find these in both types of papers. There's going to be an introduction section, a methods section, and in here you should be describing your search strategy and including tables and or figures illustrating the search strategy and or keyword combinations. We worked on the keyword combinations last term. A lot of papers will include those. Why do they include those? Because they show the deliberate effort you've taken to make sure that you've exhaustively explored the literature for potential articles related to your topic. And it doesn't matter if you're doing a systematic review or a scoping review. Again, it illustrates to the reader, it illustrates to the reviewers of the potential manuscript that you have done your due diligence. Then there's going to be a results section where you are talking about the results, but also a key important thing is to have tables or a table or tables that summarize the evidence. Now, in some papers, you might see several tables, and sometimes those several tables are there because they may be trying to answer a couple questions. You more than likely may only have one table. And usually in those tables, you have a column for the author and year, the level of evidence, the population being studied, the intervention, and maybe a short summary of findings. And then within the text, you may do like what we did last term, where you talk about an article individually, or as you'll see, a lot of times the concepts are looked at in kind of a global perspective. Now, what about a meta-analysis if you're doing a systematic review? That's not been something that's required in this class in the past. And it is a statistical procedure that you're not required to do if you go the systematic review route. but I leave it open to you and your committee. Because if you do have a preponderance of randomized controlled trials and your committee has an interest in doing that, then maybe that's something that your committee could discuss and consider. But again, that is for you all to figure out. Discussion section and then a conclusion section, and then consider using sort statements if appropriate, especially for the type of journal that you might be submitting to or considering to submit to. Whether or not you include a sort statement in your paper, again, that'll be something that will be kind of up to you and your committee. Now, there is a homework assignment for 10 points due at the end of week 4, and I think I've set it up so you can upload it into Canvas. Now, the purpose of this assignment is to do kind of a check-in, just to kind of make sure you're keeping momentum going and keeping you working through things, because again, you're really busy, you're doing clinical stuff, you're doing travel stuff, but I want you to communicate with your committee and write some paragraphs on kind of communication with these topics here. So, for example, what is going to be the role of your committee members? Now, in a traditional PhD committee situation, there's a chair and there are then supporting committee members. And so in that type of situation, you would be working very closely with that chairperson and then bringing things to the large group. The reason that's done is to not overwhelm everybody, not to have too many cooks in the kitchen. So the question is, with your committee, how do you and your team want to handle things? Do you want to have a point person, maybe the content expert, where you're bouncing ideas, discussing things? Do you want to have that point person, and then as you write things, send out drafts for everybody to take a look at once your committee kind of head person, point person has taken a look at things? So I think that's important to kind of consider. What would be the best way for your team to work together? Also, how are you going to be communicating with each other? Are you going to check in every week, every few weeks? What's kind of the plan along those lines? And what is the plan for making manuscript edits? So find out from them, like, all right, here's my idea. What do we think about going for a systematic review or scoping review? And how soon do you want to see a first edit? And then if I give you an edit, how quickly would you normally be able to turn things around? What kind of work on those logistics side of things? That way, everybody kind of knows up front what the potential expectations are. And again, number 2 now, what's the plan? Systematic review or scoping review? This is maybe a question for everybody, and to get a sense as to, do they know the literature to the same extent that you do? Maybe you could throw out to them and say, hey, I think my evidence supports a systematic review because I have available 9 randomized controlled trials and the minimum recommendation was 8. What do you think? Or maybe it's one of those things where the committee comes back and says, you know what? Maybe a scoping review would be better because some of those randomized controlled trials, even though they are RCTs, they're kind of weak as you break them down. So kind of have that conversation and then describe what led to that decision. And then finally, discuss, if warranted, this may not be a paragraph that you need to write, any current challenges that you and the committee might be facing at this time. All right, so you've got stuff you can work on. I'm going to be available through May 16th to be readily accessible via email. Things may get a little more challenging to reach me again between May 17th and May 25th because of the service trip to Costa Rica. All right, wherever you are, be safe, have fun, and talk to you soon.